Welcome everybody to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call. We're having a special one, or it's really aimed at addressing the crisis around rental housing in the United States and the eviction, the end of the eviction moratorium, potentially the end of this month. We're got a lot of very good people who are doing excellent work here that we want to be able to really highlight. And we'll continue doing that throughout the call. And let me just walk through quickly what we have on the agenda. We want to get started and dive in. And we're going to do a quick legislative update because there's a lot going on in Congress. And we think we really want you to be engaged, especially with the Senate right now. We're really continuing to push the $100 million for housing counseling, as well as other legislation. Ellie's going to give a quick NHRC updates on some things you should know about, but we're going to really spend most of the time on the emergency rental assistance program, ERAP, and the CDC eviction moratorium. As I'm sure you know, it's coming to at the end of to June, at the end of this month, and there's a lot of roles that we can play. We obviously would like to see it extended, but there's no guarantee, and we really need to make sure that we don't end up with lots of people losing their houses who shouldn't, losing their rental situations. So a lot of important stuff. We'll have Elena Calabro from the National Low Income Housing Coalition to give us the national overview. They're doing really excellent work on this and many other low income housing issues. And you'll see, I think it'll be a really in-depth view of where things stand and what it means. And then we're going to have three of the leading groups that are working in the field on this work and their experience about what works and how to reach people and how to really help as many renters as possible. Certainly, please use the chat function if you've got ideas about more things we could be doing or more experiences on what works well in the field. This is all stuff. It's obviously a moving target here, but we really need to, as often is the case, we have to step up and meet the challenge. So with that, let's jump over to Latika and let's hear what's happening in the Congress. So Latika, what's the latest?
So we have an update. The president's FY 2022 budget actually proposed $65.9 million for HUD housing counseling assistance. The additional $20 million that was previously communicated will be set aside for legal services. But as you know, we are still pushing for $100 million for next year's budget, and we'll be reaching out to some Senate offices across the 50 states to ask for this addition in funding. We will be speaking with Senator Van Hollen's staff, Senator Coons, Joe Manchin, Senator Capito, Kennedy, Boozman, as well as some additional senators who have a big role in the appropriations confirmation of funding. And so you all the organizations on this call could be a great help by asking your senators to sign on to the Dear Colleague letter that is being circulated by Senator Menendez for $100 million. All the offices have received the letter. I sent out an email to everyone. So if you could reach out to your senators and ask them to sign on the letter, it would be a great help so that we could push this ask forward and confirm $100 million for next year. Thank you so much.
Good. So I want to just underline here that this is all about getting a bill through appropriations. Right now, we had a very good push in the House with a letter by Representative Kildee for $100 million, and Senator Menendez, who's really been the big housing counseling supporter in the Senate, is doing a similar letter. And what these letters are is they're signed by senators to indicate to the Appropriations Committee that they would like to see a certain level of funding. So it carries a lot of weight, but not every senator signs them, and they're actually getting flooded with requests for lots of different requests like this. So having ours stand out, the best way to do that is really to have local agencies call their offices and talk to their senators. So this is specifically in the Senate. It's really happening now. The deadline for the letter is Tuesday. So what would be really valuable is at the end of this call, if you would call each of your senators, Democratic and Republican, and ask them, tell them there's a dear colleague letter from Senator Menendez, and we are really asking for you to support $100 billion for housing counseling, and explain what you do in the field. Just explain what you're doing with people who are renters and with homeowners. And that's effective. That will be, it will get that higher on their list, their radar of what needs to be done. So with that, let's catch up on a couple NHRC updates. So Ellie. There we go. Nope, we can't hear you, Ellie.
Took me some time to get my webcam shared. Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to quickly talk about a couple of things. So we have been, we've reported to you all about this, and we've been working on this for some time about the issue around first-time home buyers and how they're kind of being pushed out of the market by cash buyers and investors. So we'd really appreciate any information that you all can provide about what you're seeing around that. We've created a survey, and the link is here in the slide, and I'll also put it in the chat box. And speaking of the slides, they are available under the handout section if you want to download them and print them out for yourselves. They'll also be included when we send out the recording so that you can access these links easily. But anyway, that survey asks a series of questions about cash buyers and what you're seeing and how it's impacting your first-time buyers in your market. As you know, when we talk about what housing counselors are seeing on the ground, people really listen. So we really are looking for you to give us information about what you're seeing that'll help us really make some, have good arguments and good stories to move forward with potential policy changes. And then additionally, the $9.9 billion for the Housing Assistance Fund is being worked on. The guidance and some initial guidance came out from Treasury. We talked about it on our calls here. The National Council of State Housing Agencies has a page that shows which states have already put forward some sort of proposed program and are seeking comment. Treasury has not issued their final guidance for how states should be putting together their funds, but the states are moving forward based on the initial guidance and putting out information for comment. So you can go to this link and it shows you which states have already put out some kind of plan. And this is an example of what's on the page. All the states in green are ones that have published some sort of draft plan that you can comment on. There's one state that used some initial funding that was made available by the Treasury Department to do a pilot program, and that's New Mexico, and you can see what their program looks like. So that page gives a lot of information, and you can keep going to it, and it will be updated. So that's it for me. Back to you, Bruce.
Great, excellent. And obviously, as we've talked about before, one of the roles that housing counselors can play is to be a navigator or an assistant to help renters qualify for the funding and make application and get into the program, but also link them up with other programs and help them with other running debts that they've got. So this is both the short-term and long-term viability for renters. And so this will be key work. We'll have a chance to talk about this with some of the practitioners on the ground soon. But let's move on quickly to our featured speakers. We're going to start out with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. As I said earlier, they've done tremendous work in Congress and with the administration about lots of low-income housing issues, but are particularly, we're going to be talking about the emergency rental assistance, which is key as a solution for people and hopefully a way to transition before people are faced with eviction. So welcome, Elena Calabro. Glad to have you here, and please fill us in on what we need to know and what counselors can do in the situation.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Elena. I'm a policy analyst at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Really excited to be here today. So my presentation will cover some of the broader policy context around Treasury's Emergency Rental Assistance Program, including some highlights from Treasury's recent guidance that they released May 7th. And then I'll also highlight several resources that NLIHC has developed to help tenants and advocates access these critical resources. But first, I just wanted to highlight some of the latest data on housing instability, as well as our concerns about the federal eviction moratorium's pending expiration. So while that we know that state and local governments are working really diligently to provide ERA to renters, far too many renters right now are struggling to access this aid, and they are at risk of losing their homes when the federal eviction moratorium expires on June 30th. So we know that at least 6 million renter households, or about 14% of all renter households, who are predominantly households of color, people with disabilities, and other marginalized people, remain behind on their rent. And while vaccination rates are up and COVID-19 caseloads are down in many areas, those communities with lower vaccination rates and higher COVID-19 cases tend to be the same as those renters at heightened risk of eviction when the moratorium expires. So allowing the federal eviction moratorium to expire before vaccination rates increase in marginalized communities could lead to increased spread of and deaths from COVID-19. So at NLIHC, we're urging the Biden administration to prevent a historic wave of evictions this summer by extending, strengthening, and enforcing the federal eviction moratorium, as well as by implementing a whole of government approach to distribute emergency rental assistance as efficiently and effectively to those most in need. Next slide, please. So there are two funding buckets for Treasury's ERA program. The first is the $25 billion provided through December's emergency relief package, which we're going to call ERA 1, and then the $21.5 billion through the American Rescue Plan in March, also known as ERA 2. So ERA 1 can be used to cover current and future rent, rental arrears, utility and home energy costs, and utility and home energy arrears. ERA 1 can cover up to 12 months of rent with an additional three months if necessary to ensure housing stability, for a total of 15 months. For eligible applicants with rental arrears, program administrators can provide ERA 1 for prospective rent, but only if they have provided assistance to address rental arrears. And ERA 2 can be used to cover the same expenses, but provides an additional 3 months of assistance for a total of 18 months. And both ERA 1 and ERA 2 allow programs to pay for other housing-related expenses, which I'll actually talk about in more detail in just a moment. But I also just wanted to mention that the American Rescue Plan also allocated $5 billion each for the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program and the Low-Income Household Water Assistance Program, as well as $120 million for housing counseling and fair housing. Next slide. So at least 90% of program funds a recipient receives must be used for financial assistance. And the other housing-related expenses that I mentioned on the last slide may include relocation expenses, such as rental security deposits and rental fees, and prospective relocation expenses, such as application or screening fees. ERA can also be used to cover internet service, and this would fall under other housing-related expenses. There is an important distinction, though. ERA 1 requires that these other housing expenses be incurred due directly or indirectly to the pandemic, but ERA 2 does not require, they require that they be related to housing, but it does not require that they be incurred due to the pandemic. And both pots of ERA allow for up to 10% of funds received by a grantee to be used for housing stability services, though they do have different requirements. Under ERA 1, these funds may be used to provide eligible households with services related to the COVID-19 pandemic. But under ERA 2, it's more expansive because these services do not have to be related to the pandemic. Housing stability services may include housing counseling, fair housing counseling, case management related to housing stability, housing related services for survivors of domestic violence or human trafficking, legal services or attorney's fees, and specialized services for seniors and people with disabilities that support their housing ability, their ability to access or maintain housing. Finally, up to 10% of ERA 1 funds can be used for administrative costs that are attributable to providing financial assistance and the housing stability services. Under ERA 2, it's bumped up a little bit to up to 15% can be used for admin. Next slide, please. In terms of eligibility, the eligibility criteria for both pots are pretty similar, but there are differences for ERA 2 to make that pot of funding more flexible than ERA 1. So both programs require households to be at or below 80% of area median income and at risk for housing instability or homelessness. And both programs also require administrators to prioritize households at or below 50% of AMI and households with members who are currently unemployed and have been unemployed for at least 90 days. There is an important difference in eligibility between the two programs. For ERA 1, a household must be experiencing a financial hardship due directly or indirectly to the pandemic. But for ERA 2, a household can be experience the hardship during the pandemic and receive assistance, regardless of whether the hardship was actually caused by the pandemic. And so, like I mentioned earlier, this distinction broadens the eligibility for ERA 2, so administrators can assist a wider range of households. I also just wanted to note, because we received a lot of questions about this, that neither the statutes nor guidance from Treasury establish or impose any restrictions based on immigration status. Additionally, Treasury in its most recent guidance said that ERA may be provided to households who have been temporarily displaced and are living in hotels and motels. And also rental payments for a manufactured home or the parcel of land a manufactured home occupies are also eligible. Next slide, please. The Department of Treasury provided direct allocations of ERA to states and Washington, D.C., U.S. territories, tribal governments, and local governments with more than 200,000 residents. And so as of June 14th, NLIC is tracking over 1,027 programs, including 406 Treasury ERA programs. Actually, I think that now that number is 411 programs. Next slide. And the state programs are structured in a variety of ways that can affect how applicants can access the program. So some states operate under this no wrong door approach, where applicants can apply to basically any program and their application will be forwarded to the appropriate one. Other states, however, require that if an applicant lives in a city or county running its own program, they must apply through that specific one. And in terms of who applies for aid, many programs allow the landlord or the tenant to initiate the application, and most websites delineate the tenant application from the landlord application. But it's important to note that all landlord applications require some information from the tenant. So if a landlord is applying directly for ERA, they are required to notify the tenant that assistance is being provided on their behalf and to obtain the tenant's consent. Next slide, please. So I'll just provide a brief rundown of the revised guidance from Treasury. So since the initial round of guidance that was implementing ERA 1, Treasury has released subsequent guidance to increase the flexibility of the program and to allow for the quickest possible distribution of funds. So first, Treasury's revised guidance strongly discourages administrators from imposing overly burdensome documentation requirements that can pose significant barriers for the lowest income and most marginalized households. Treasury guidance explicitly allows renters to self-certify that they meet most criteria, including for COVID-related hardships, income, housing stability, and the amount of back rent owed. The revised guidance also allows programs to verify eligibility based on reasonable fact-specific proxies, such as the average income of the neighborhood in which the renter lives. For ERA 1, programs can provide aid directly to tenants only after a landlord has either refused to participate in the program or they have failed to respond to a request. Treasury's revised guidance cuts in half the time to determine whether a landlord is going to participate. And it was from 14 days to 7 days when a program is reaching out to a landlord by mail, and then from 10 days to 5 days when reaching out by phone, text, or email before that program can provide assistance directly to the tenant. Treasury's new guidance requires ERA 2 programs to provide direct-to-tenant assistance when landlords refuse to participate. And this is something that NLIHC was really pushing for, because we've been finding that landlords have been refusing and then the tenant is just basically out of luck. And so Treasury recognized this and made this decision to require ERA 2 programs to provide it directly. Additionally, ERA 2 programs are actually allowed to provide direct-to-tenant assistance first and immediately, not requiring them to go through the landlords and even seek their participation. Treasury has also made it very clear that while these rules only apply to ERA 2 and not to ERA 1, that it is the preferred policy of the administration that ERA 1 programs also implement these policies, which would be to absolutely provide direct-to-tenant when a landlord refuses to participate. Treasury's revised guidance also prohibits ERA 2 programs from denying assistance to eligible households solely because they live in federally assisted housing. And they also note that failure to abide by this may violate civil rights laws. Treasury is also strongly encouraging grantees to partner with owners of federally subsidized housing to ensure that their residents are reached. And the new guidance also prohibits landlords from evicting renters for non-payment when ERA payments are being made on their behalf. Treasury is also encouraging grantees to require that landlords not evict tenants for, say, 30 to 90 days longer than the payment is being covered for as a condition of receiving payment. And finally, because ERA can be used to cover other housing-related expenses, like relocation and security deposit assistance, these funds can also be used to cover housing expenses for people experiencing homelessness, which was another thing that we were really, all of these were things that we were really asking Treasury to address in its next revised guidance. Oh yeah, I just wanted to note too that we actually created a side-by-side comparison of both of these, of both of the Treasury's guidance, and that link will be on my resource slide at the end of my presentation. Next slide is already there. So based on Treasury guidance and lots of conversations with state and local program administrators, as well as the really amazing work that our research team is doing in tracking these programs, we have been collecting some best practices for ERA programs to cut down on application times, to speed up distribution of funding, as well as to reach the hardest hit communities. So first, we're really encouraging administrators to take advantage of the flexibility of Treasury's new guidance and to implement applications that are as low barrier and flexible as possible. Treasury is providing a lot of flexibility in terms of self-attestation, providing direct-to-tenant options, as well as prioritizing low-income households. So we're really urging administrators to take advantage of that. A second thing is that we are encouraging programs to partner with organizations that are already embedded in the hard hit and hard to reach communities to help with outreach. It will also not only ensure that these funds are distributed equitably, but it can also increase capacity, administrative capacity, by bringing in additional people to help tenants with filling out applications as well as screening applications. Because one of the things that we're seeing is that this, as you've probably heard, is that the aid is slow to get out, and so we really feel that doing these two suggestions can not only speed up the process, but also just make sure that that aid is getting to the hardest hit communities. And also encouraging programs to leverage existing like referral networks to connect like priority populations to these resources. So that can include local continuums of care, housing counselors or legal aid providers, United Way, and then any other services with which renters might interact. Okay, next slide. So I'm just going to provide a really brief overview of some of the resources that we've developed to support tenants, landlords, housing counselors, and advocates. These include a searchable database, an ERA dashboard, and a resource hub. And we hope that these resources, because they provide up-to-date information, can help landlords and tenants figure out what state and local ERA programs are in their area, and then also how to access this aid. So all of our resources can be found on the link on the slide, which is nlhc.org/rental-assistance. Okay, next slide, please. So I think that one of the most helpful tools for housing counselors, advocates, and tenants and landlords is our searchable database. As you can see, well, actually it's a little bit hard to see, but there are over 410. There's 411 programs that we're tracking, which are using the December 2020 COVID relief package. And our research team updates this 3 days per week. Also, Treasury actually has a website too now to help renters and landlords find local programs, and that link will also be on my resource slide at the end of my presentation. And we're also recommending that if people can't find a local program, that they should call 211 or their local housing authority for assistance. Next slide. This will be NLIHC's interactive ERA dashboard, which shares information about programs with key feature program design and implementation that enable them to serve the most marginalized renters who are most in need of assistance. And it's tracking how many programs are, accepting self-attestation, which programs are excluding tenants from tenants with federal rent subsidies. And we keep adding to that and adding new indicators. All right, and then finally, the next one, we recently launched an ERA resource hub several weeks ago, which offers examples of how programs are incorporating self-attestation, direct tenant assistance, prioritization. We have stuff about outreach, like robust outreach on there too, and several other elements of design and implementation. And so the purpose of this is just to facilitate resource sharing by offering tools and examples that can be, customizable for program administrators and advocates. And then just the next slide is just a slide with resources, some of the ones that I've mentioned, with links primarily to Treasury's ERA webpage, and then also our resources too. So I'll just stop here. I'll answer questions at the end, or you can always email me. My email address is on the next slide. Yeah, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So Ellie, do we have some questions?
We'll hold the questions until the end.
Great. So Ellie, do you want to handle the introductions for the next section?
Sure. So our next presenter is Lisa Sorrow with Arundel Community Development in Maryland. And I'm going to go to your slide, Lisa.
Great.
And take it away. Thank you.
All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisa Sorrow. I'm General Counsel with Arundel Community Development Services. And you can go to the next slide, Ellie, that says a little bit about who we are. Great. So Arundel Community Development Services is our county's housing department. We're a separate nonprofit, a private nonprofit organization, but we function as the county's housing and community development department. And that means that we are the portal for funding for other nonprofits in the county. But at the same time, we provide direct services to county residents in need of assistance. In addition to some community development, building, construction, that sort of thing, we also house a staff of housing financial counselors. And then we have, over the last year and a half, developed a really robust staff of case managers for emergency rental assistance in the county. Our program is the largest rental assistance program in the county, but we also have farmed money out to some of our community partners in the that we work with on the continuum of care program, because we also manage the continuum of care program, which is really handy. So we maintain at ACDS a really strong focus on tenant focused care, and our program is tenant based. We don't accept applications directly from landlords, though I'll talk in a minute about a lot of involvement that we have with the landlords. But we really do focus on that one-on-one contact with the tenants in the rental assistance program. In addition to the financial assistance, therefore, we also connect the tenants with additional services that we think have been really helpful. Most importantly, legal assistance. Next slide, please. So Anne Arundel found that there was a need for legal services in connection with the rental assistance program to ensure that the program had time to actually get money to landlords and prevent evictions. So they brought on an in-house attorney, and that's me, and we brought on legal services providers on top of me. I deal with the landlords and the lawyers, but we have community legal services available with designated full-time attorneys for our clients, for clients going through the rental assistance processing. We consider our legal services partner to be a really integral, crucial part of our program. They really are a firewall to prevent evictions while we are able to process applications and get money to landlords and keep the tenants from being evicted. The other thing that we're finding our legal partners are able to do is they really coordinate well with us to negotiate settlements with landlords and to ensure that the tenants are protected after our payments are made. And we found that in some instances, those landlords who might have been resistant to accepting or participating in our program learn about it through the lawyers, and then they're willing to participate and they come back for more because we have a really generous program. They're also educating the court and the clerks, and we're actually seeing a lot of referrals to our program by judges and by court clerks who are getting both landlords and tenants to our program to ensure that this rental assistance money that we have gets out the door and is used for its intended purpose. Next slide. So outcomes, we have had incredibly good outcomes with our legal services providers. Just since mid-March, when our ERA1 program started, they've helped over 200 households. They've represented more, that number is low right now, more than 70 households, countless motions to stay evictions and motions to vacate. Judgments have been filed successfully. In every instance where legal representation has been provided, we have been able to prevent evictions or delay evictions until the tenant could get into alternative housing if that was going to be necessary. So it's been really helpful. We are not a right to counsel state. There was legislation just recently that would make us one of the only right to counsel in legal service in failure to pay rent cases, but it's not funded yet and it's not up and running. So we basically made our own right to counsel right here in our county, and it's been working really well. We're currently developing those relationships with the court clerks and the sheriffs to get extra information about when folks are about to be evicted so we can step in and intervene. And we're also planning, like everyone else, for what's going to happen at the end of the moratorium. I'm sorry, I've got a 2-month-old puppy out there barking. Next slide, please. Sunny, come here. So landlord involvement. We have been working with landlords closely, even though we are a tenant-based program. We brought in landlords to get their buy-in and get their participation. We really do consider them to be partners in getting this money out, because we need information from them as well, and we need them to agree to keep these tenants housed even after we pay money. So we brought them in. They were part of the drafting process for our landlord agreement. I hope everyone can hear me over that puppy. Hang on.
Yes, we can hear you okay, Lisa. You're good.
Okay, so sorry about that. So we have nearly 100% landlord participation in our program. So we haven't been in a position where we needed to pay money over directly to the tenants. We are in Maryland you can't discriminate based on source of income. So that's probably helpful for us. The other thing we've done with landlords is we've developed a really robust landlord incentive package for landlords who are willing to accept tenants who have been displaced as a result of COVID. So next slide. In addition to the legal support and working with the landlords, we have a pretty robust relocation support package for our tenants, or for the landlords. On the one hand, we provide leasing bonuses, application expense reimbursements, enhanced security deposits, the first month's rent, 3 months perspective, and we let them be participants in the county's landlord risk mitigation fund so they can get damages back if there are damages to their property in excess of the security deposit. And they have access to a case manager that stays in place for as long as the resident is in their property. Next slide. I think that's the last one's coming up, I think. So the ongoing assistance that we provide to our clients is ongoing monthly rental assistance. We are very, very fortunate in our county to have quite a bit of money to distribute. We're very grateful for that. So we are providing rental assistance prospectively after we've paid arrears, and we're going to continue doing that for as long as we have funding for every applicant that comes through. So they just have to reapply every 3 months. If they're still financially eligible, we're going to keep paying. And along with that continued payment is continued case management and support by a case manager who can connect the tenants as they need it with other services that may be able to help them. And that's where our continuum of care connection is really helpful, because we can get them to other programs that will help these families to stay stable, stay safely housed for the long term. And so that's what we're doing. In addition to providing financial assistance, we're kind of trying to do financial assistance plus in our county. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Now we're going to move to Jimmy Thomas, who is a rental counselor with Northwest Side CDC, and he's going to talk with us about the programming that they do. Jimmy.
Okay, can you all hear me? Great.
We can hear you.
Yeah, so great. So my agency, we're an affiliate of the Northwest Side Housing Center, and we're located in the Belmont-Cragen community, which is on the northwest side of the city of Chicago. Our population is almost entirely Latinx, and we do a lot of work specifically in Belmont-Cragen, but really across the city as well. So we are one of the delegate agencies for both the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. And what that looks like is that there's the lottery funds that are available. So the state received X amount of dollars, and then the city received X amount of dollars. And some of those funds are being delivered for rental assistance via lottery system, or maybe less lottery and more first come, first served, but with dated windows to apply. And in the case of the state funding, we were one of the delegate agencies to just help get out information, so do advertising, promoting, but also a resource for folks to ask questions to. So if they have questions about the application and, you know, what does this line mean? How do we fill out that? We're there to do that. And then with the city, there's a separate lottery program that is available for folks to apply for. But then there's I think it's 14 agencies, delegate agencies throughout the city that actually have their own set aside funds. And so what that looks like is we'll be the ones, rather than just helping answer questions or directing people to the applications, we're going to be the ones who are is receiving applications and documents and also approving. So we're not handling the actual distribution of the funds. The city is still doing that, but we are the ones who are going to be approving it and outlining that. So, and I think to the earlier point about like having those delegate agencies, I believe that was in the first presentation, talking about these agencies that are really set to reach targeted communities so that resources are approved. Like that's the hope of having the delegate agencies. So we work with a specific population, people who tend not to get resources allocated to them. So the purpose there was to have our agency situated to reach the Latinx and immigrant community, and to be able to ensure that they were able to get rental assistance funds as well. You know, kind of a big theme throughout this, surprisingly, has been there is money. So, you know, it's not often that you get to say like, yeah, there's money, there's plenty of money. So I think that's been sort of a running theme for us in talking to people. Just knowing that there is assistance for people, and if one program closes, that doesn't mean another program is closed. And I'm not sure that other, you know, depending on how funds are being distributed in other states or counties, since Chicago is such a large metropolis in the state of Illinois, that there's numerous programs, and some are specific to Chicago, and some are specific to Cook County, and some are specific, you know, some are broadly across the state of Illinois. And so communication has been a really big issue about making sure that folks know when they heard that the application was closed, it's like, well, which application are you talking about? Because, for example, right now, the state of Illinois application is closed, but it's opening up again, or the city application, the city lottery application closed, but the delegate agencies haven't opened up yet. So it's really been, you know, a process of kind of continually communicating with our clients and outreach, that making sure, you know, it's hard enough for someone who's in the field to remember all of the details of the program. So let alone folks who are just hearing something on the news or seeing something online, and helping them navigate those various applications, where the funds coming from, what are the differences, and, you know, if you can apply for a program with the state, can you not apply for a program with the city, and vice versa. So we've been we've been reaching out to a lot of folks, and we do rental counseling in general. So we do work with both landlords and tenants, which is a little bit unique. Most nonprofits work with either landlords or with tenants, mainly tenants. But we do work with both. And so aside from our normal work, which because of the pandemic and people not wanting to move and the eviction moratoriums, most of that work has come to a standstill. Folks aren't moving, and landlords can't evict anyone for the most part. So it's really been a lot of focus and energy on the various rental assistance programs and helping people understand those options, getting prepared ahead of time. Yeah, so that's kind of broadly what we've been doing and the work we've been doing with landlords and tenants and helping them keep informed.
Great, thank you, Jimmy. We will be taking questions at the end, so hopefully you can stick around in case folks have questions for you. Our next presenter is Charlie Jackson with Wyoming Housing Network, and she's going to talk a little bit about their programming, which is specific to Wyoming being a more rural state. She has some specific aspects of her program to talk about related to that. Charlie, take it away.
Thanks, Ellie. So I'm just going to start this off by letting you know that my internet connection is not the greatest. We do, like she said, live in a very rural area, and so some of those services are not quite as great as they are in the bigger cities. So I am a HUD certified housing counselor. I guess everything's on the screen there that tells you all the stuff I do, but the rental counseling actually comes quite natural to me, as prior to being a housing counselor, I spent 16 years as a landlord. I worked in multifamily housing communities. My last 5 years of that was in low-income affordable housing. So I guess I have the benefit of knowing how to talk to landlords and residents. The biggest thing that we have in the state of Wyoming is low population. Our state consists of around 500,000 people. My organization, the Wyoming Housing Network, does serve the entire state. So I can get phone calls from places in the state that I've never even seen, even though I have been here my whole life. So some of the challenges that I face as a housing counselor in a rural setting is that we don't always have the technology available. So when I tell someone that they need to go to a website, a lot of times it's, well, I won't make it to town to go to the library for a month or a week, or my cell phone doesn't really work very well at my residence and things like that. So there are some challenges. Also, just the lack of resources available in some communities. There are towns in Wyoming that don't even have a grocery store, let alone a housing agency that can help with rental assistance. So those are some challenges. I think some of the benefits to our state being a low population are that a lot of the assistance that we do receive is very adequate to serve the citizens of Wyoming. So the rental assistance program, for instance, was one that I believe we did definitely receive an overabundance of assistance with that. They had a cutoff, and it was by population. And so we did receive the lowest amount available, but because our population is so low, it's definitely adequate. The value in the resources and partnerships that are available, I can't even emphasize enough that this is probably the most important part of what I do. sourcing out resources to help people with rental assistance, or just even a list of food banks that are available in their area. These things are so important. I get most of my resources are from attending community events, or of course now we do a lot of things through the internet. And so I just really seek out what other organizations are doing. And if it's someone that I believe that would be beneficial to a rental client, then I'm talking to them, I'm calling them, having conversations. If they're local or if they're in a town that I'm going to be visiting, I go in and I talk to them, and I just get a real good understanding of what they offer. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program has, it's been kind of a slow go for us here. I did look this morning to see if they had updated how many applications they had received, and it's just over 3,000 as of the 11th of June. And they've been requested 6.5 million. So for you that live in those more urban areas, that probably doesn't sound like much, but that to us here is pretty huge. The application processing has been going a bit slow, and our landlords have not really been able to understand why they need to go in and fill out information. So that's been a bit of a struggle for us here. So I've been on the phone with landlords explaining the process. Anybody that calls me that I think that will qualify for the process or the program, I will make sure that they understand how that can be done, even if they don't have the internet access. So my organization, as soon as the pandemic was released, we put together what we call the Take Action Plan. Our department is made up of 6 people that facilitate housing counseling, and we all contributed to this Take Action packet. If you're interested in what this packet is, it is available through the Wyoming Housing Network website as a download, but it includes an emergency budget. Also, it goes through the process of gathering the information to contact creditors, and then also just some information about how to have that conversation with a creditor to make a workout plan if they're unable to make those payments. And then we also included a list of state resources, because like I said, we service the entire state. So we wanted to make sure that our resources would actually be beneficial to anybody in our state. We have, during the pandemic, we were partnered with the United Way of Natrona County, here where we live. They received a sizable donation that was earmarked for people who were unable to make a housing payment, whether it be rent or mortgage payments. And so what we did was facilitated the application processing, just to make sure that people qualified for it. The nice thing about that money was that for qualified households, they would pay the housing payment. They would also pay for things like utilities, childcare. One person even received, I don't know how much, but it was enough money to fill up her gas tank. And it was because her hours had been cut back at work so much that she wasn't even able to afford the gas to get to and from work. So the resource part, anybody can do this, put together some good resources. You just have to get out there and find out what's available in your community. Right now, we are currently facing an end to our unemployment benefits for the pandemic relief. That's going to be coming to an end very, very soon. And of course, the eviction moratorium will be ending. So there's a lot of unease, of course, in our communities about what this is going to mean for them. And with all of the rental programs that have been offered have come with stipulations that the people aren't sure if they're going to qualify for it or not. They've just been very at unease. So what we're doing is we're really out there talking to people about what's available, how they can supplement income by maybe utilizing food banks and things. But the biggest thing that I have to offer my clients is just that list of resources of different things that are offered. And hopefully, having built these strong resources, we can get our residents through this time. My phone number and email address were on the first slide. And if you have any questions after the webinar, I am more than happy to talk to you about anything. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Charlie. So
Ellie,
we
can I
are
ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
So I'd like to ask this of Lisa, Jimmy, and Charlie. And I think one of the challenges that groups are having right now is how to reach tenants so that we can help them. And so I'd be very interested in what you've learned about what's effective in outreach. How do people know about your program? How do they come to you? And do you have any kind of best practices to advise? So Lisa first.
Sure. So we are relying heavily on our community partners, the folks that we work with in the continuum of care. We've actually subcontracted with what's called Lighthouse Shelter. So that's our homeless shelter in Annapolis. We've subcontracted with our community action agency to provide assistance to their client base. We're working with Centro de Ayuda, which is an organization that helps the Spanish-speaking community in Annapolis. And they're both helping to fill out applications, and they're also probably before too long going to be running their own program with some funding that we're going to provide to them. We've also partnered with both of our housing authorities. We've got one in the county and one in the city to ensure that we get to individuals who have those housing subsidies. We want to provide assistance to them. It's a struggle. We're using the courts, as I said before, but by the time folks get to the courts, it's pretty late in the process for them to be getting to us. But we prioritize people who are on the verge of eviction. It is a struggle to get folks. We have this huge waiting list, and then I talk to people outside of our organization and hear, well, nobody knows about it. Nobody knows about it. And so it's frustrating, but we're trying our best. I'm interested to hear what other people are doing.
Have you done any publicity? Have you tried social media, that sort of thing? I'm going to ask everybody these same questions. So
yeah. So yes, and our county executive talks it up all the time on his weekly meetings. We're talking about seeing if we can do something with Comcast to target specific areas that might be a little too costly. But we're trying everything that we can. Maybe we'll get on the sides, literally on the sides of buses, that sort of thing, just to get the word out.
Good. Jimmy, what's your experience in that works? I know you have a lot of history, especially in the Latino community.
Yeah, I will answer your question about advertising and outreach, but I will say our problem is not having enough people to contact us about assistance. Our problem is people not completing the application. So I would say it's, maybe 50% of the people who we have some sort of conversation with them. Like we talk to them, have a text message conversation with them. So it's not just a blind outreach. Like we have talked to them and they said, yes, I want rental assistance. And then we send them the application and don't hear back from them. Or they fill out the application, but they're missing a document and we contact them and they don't ever respond to it for whatever reason. So
Yeah.
I don't think in terms of
But how do they
on
know
the
to
city
contact
level,
in the first
with
place? Have you
Chicago, for example, we're probably gonna end up helping about 300 households, give or take. And my guess is we'll be in touch with 500 households before we get 300 completed applications. So it's definitely, we have a lot of volume. And I think on some level that's beyond us. So I don't want to take credit for, you know, the city and the state being really good about advertising that there are programs. And then we just have a lot of different programs. So we do, you know, we are a housing center and we do foreclosure prevention and first time home buying and all that stuff. But we also have a parent mentor program in the community. So we are running the parent mentor program in 5 or 6 elementary schools. And so those people know to like tell everyone. We have, we run the like neighborhood older adult check-in like daily program, and those people are calling everyone. And then we have so many resources. So it's really been, it's less about expanding our network and more about taking our already expansive network and making sure that everyone in it knows about the resources. So we've had pretty good follow-up, and I'm very fortunate. I have a couple of folks working with me who are doing way more of the phone calls than I am. And I think they've each reached out to close to 300 people already in the past month. So we have a lot of demand.
And we worked with Northwest Side Housing Center a couple of years ago at an event, and one of your strengths was you had a lot of social media presence. So is that a tool you've used, and what's worked there?
Yeah, you know, I've actually been hesitant. I think we do have a really strong social media for events, like when we're trying to have an event and we want people to attend or knowledge. I've actually been pulling back on that when people are like, oh, why don't we put it on Facebook? And I'm like, no, please don't. Like, we really have had a very high volume of people who are contacting us, and it's, I don't think that advertising has been the problem for us. And I say that, I'm not saying like, oh, we don't do any advertising or network. I'm saying I think we already do that pretty extensively. So it happens more organically now, which is great. But I have not felt the need to promote it further. It's definitely been a need of like the people who already started the application, we want them to finish the application. So yeah, but we do have really good social media, and my coworker Laura does a wonderful job with that.
Okay, well, thanks. So Charlie.
So because we are so rural, we do a little bit of everything. You know, our community partners are really great about understanding what our services are and directing people to us that they think we can help. Social media, pretty much all of the social medias. We run advertisements and just informational things on that. Radio, television, newspaper, billboards. We don't have buses, so we can't do that. But we do actually have a person that drives around the state and goes in and talks to different organizations. We hang informational flyers in grocery stores. You know, when you walk in the grocery store, sometimes there's a little board that you can put stuff on. So we'll do that, especially in small towns. That's sometimes the only way that you can reach the population. I really can't think of any type of advertising avenue that we haven't used.
Good. Okay, Ellie, I'll flip it over to you.
Great, thanks. Okay, so the first question that we have, I think, goes right back to Elena, asking ER1 allows displaced tenants to get help with hotels even if they do not have rent or hotel arrears?
Sorry about that. Yes. So what happens with the hotels and motels is it's considered under an other housing related expense. So it's not technically considered under rent. So rent or back or forward rent or utilities. So because it's not considered under that, they don't have to have like rental arrears.
Okay.
Does that answer it?
Yes, yes. I think they just wanted clarification to make sure that they heard that right.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and again, I think this one is also for you, Elena. It may be Lisa, I'm not sure. Whoever can answer. Is the grantee required to follow up to determine if the tenant gave the funds to the landlord when they refused to participate, or confirm that the funds were used, say for instance, for moving expenses? Lisa, you're shaking your head no.
Yeah, no, actually, there's specific language in the CDBG funding, I know, that says the grantee is not required to confirm whether the funds were used for the intended purpose or not, unless the applicant comes back for additional assistance. And that's when you need to confirm that they used it for the purpose that it was provided to them. I think that's what is making so many organizations, ours included, concerned about making payments direct to tenants. Because in our case, if the landlord refuses, the only condition we put on our money is that the landlord not evict for at least 3 months for lease non-renewal. So if they're refusing, it's because they're going to evict the tenant. So we're very concerned about just giving the money to the tenant, having the tenant give the money to the landlord, and then the tenant gets evicted. So that's a concern, but the answer is no. You don't have to do that follow-up and confirmation.
Okay. So somebody has a concern that they can counsel and are prepared for that, but are afraid that potential clients experiencing a housing crisis will expect direct assistance from our organization and not just counseling. We've seen local and state rental assistance programs really slow pace. So I think what's being asked is they see a client who they can say to the client, yes, here's a program that's available for you, but then that program doesn't become available in a very efficient fashion. So I don't know if it's a question or just putting that concern out there if anybody wants to comment on that. No comments, okay.
I mean, I think that's kind of a regular concern, like certainly amplified by COVID and the need for rental assistance, but like people call me all the time thinking I do something that I don't do. So, you know, being like, oh, being very clear, like this is what we do, this is not what we do. So like, yes, the volume of it is off the charts right now that people expect that you'll get financial rental assistance. But for example, that's something our agency normally has never historically had financial rental assistance. So that's a new thing, and just being very clear. I have 2 camps, like I get so many referrals from my coworkers, and so I've trained them all to be like rental assistance or rental counseling. Like those are the 2 camps. So I don't know. I don't think there's a quick or easy answer besides just tell everyone that.
Okay. Okay, so this is a housing counselor in New York. I'll share that even though the Treasury Department is trying to make ERAP applications easier, there are still a lot of questions and a time commitment to completing the application, at least in New York. We've completed about 20 applications so far for LMI households, and minimally, each application is taking at least an hour, sometimes longer. Those with lower literacy levels will need assistance. Feel free to comment. Lisa, you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. All of the language that's coming out of Treasury and HUD is directed toward reducing barriers, reducing paperwork. The problem is the rental assistance programs still have to provide a ton of reporting documentation and information on a very regular basis about basically every application that comes through. So a lot of that information, unfortunately, is still necessary, but we do, as rental assistance programs, need to make a real effort to ensure that everyone can complete that application. If they can't do it on the intranet themselves, they need to be able to call somebody who can walk them through it and maybe type it in for them, type the information in for them. If they have a language barrier, there needs to be interpretation services available to ensure that their application can get completed. As I said, we contract with an organization that does bilingual triage and assistance, but also the application, the online application that we're using, applicants can click a button to say which language they want the application to be in, and it will be in that language for them while they're filling it out, and then it converts back to English for our case managers when they're reviewing it. But it's hard, we hear from applicants often that are trying to enter all of their information, including uploading documents, on a phone. And that it's hard, it's really hard. So, we invite them in, we can print the papers, but it's not easy. There's a ton of papers. If you've got an hour-long application process online, that's going to be a lot of paper. I don't know what the solution is. I wish that I did, to make it shorter, because we would love to have a shorter process.
Okay, this person is saying that they're getting funds through their city, but many of the tenants are 6 to 12 months behind. And how do you get access to their landlords in order to talk to them?
Well, I just call them. I think it's a Wyoming thing, I'm not sure, but people respond better to an actual phone call. So that's the best advice I have.
Relies on the tenant having the landlord's phone number, correct?
Usually you can, so if you want to know who someone is that owns a property, that information is usually, as long as it's not multifamily housing, it's usually available through the treasurer's office. You don't always get the phone number, but you can at least mail a letter because you'll have their address. Or I'm sorry, not the treasurer's office, the assessors, the county assessor's office has that information of who owns the property.
Okay. Lisa, do you have suggestions for how to get contact information for the landlord?
Right, so our application includes information box for the landlord. So if the tenant has an email address or phone number, we use both of those. That hasn't, for us, been a big problem, locating the landlords. What has been occasionally a problem is we're dealing with a property manager, and they're making business decisions for the landlord that the landlord may not necessarily know is being made. If we've got 6 months or 7 months, 8 months of rent on the table to give to the landlord, but the property manager is saying, I'm not willing to agree that we'll keep them there for 3 months. That's the bigger hurdle for us, is actually getting to the landlord around the property manager. And that's where our legal partners come in, and they can generally do that. We also have rental license requirements in Anne Arundel County, so we can, it's not an easy process, but we can locate landlords through the rental licensing program as well. That really hasn't been a problem for us, though.
And Jimmy, what about in your program?
Yeah, if the tenant doesn't know the landlord's contact information, that's like that's bad lease hookup. So that's a separate conversation. I have seen a lot of like, I don't know, his name's Tom, this is his number. Like they don't know where they live, but they have some sort of contact for them. Secondly, kind of to Lisa's point about the landlords want the money. They're not like, so they also know about these programs. And I'm not sure how other municipalities are running, but both the city and the state here have options for the tenant to apply if the landlord is not responsive. So if there's a situation where either they really don't know how to contact the landlord or the landlord doesn't want to participate, they can just go around it. So, I guess I don't have that problem. I have had the reverse problem where landlords want to apply and the tenant is just kind of like, forget you, I'm not going to do it. And they don't really have any recourse around that.
Great. Okay, Lisa, this is specifically for you. Could someone who is currently homeless but does not receive income, not currently residing in your county, but wants to relocate to your county, could they apply under your relocation program?
That's a really hard one. And there are all kinds of agreements between the counties and the funding. And we would definitely have to look at each one of those on a case-by-case basis. I'll tell you the bigger problem that we're having is that people who we know to be local here are losing their housing. They're displaced. They've been displaced and can't find any place within our county. It's a relatively affluent county. We've got high rents, and it's a high demand. And folks are selling their houses, selling what was rental properties. So we have a hard enough time getting the current residents housed in our county. I think we would have a really difficult time justifying bringing someone from another county into the county for housing.
Okay, somebody is asking how you address the situation. Jimmy, you kind of brought this up about people not completing the application, but how do you address the situation where there's people who fail to complete the application due to mental capacity, language barriers, disability issues, etc.?
I mean, do the best you can. I don't like specifically with our agency, because so much of our population speaks Spanish. Like my Spanish is pretty good, but the people we have hired to work on this program must be bilingual. Like that's not an option. So in our case, our targeted population we're worried about is Spanish speakers, and we've hired to accommodate that. Yeah, I mean, you do the best you can, and I think that's kind of, again, it's a question of volume, not a question of difference. Like that's a problem I always face, right? Folks who are less capable to engage in rental counseling, and I don't know that there's a good answer to that. If you have a really specific common occurring population, like for us, the Spanish-speaking population, like yes, you're going to hire based on that. You're going to change your whole policies. Other than that, sometimes with the volume, it's just like you try your best, you reach out to them. But this is regardless of reduced capability for whatever reason, like I kind of feel like you can only help the people who are ready to be helped. If they're not in a position to engage in the process right now, you do your best to reach them and you tell them, right? You got to be clear about like there's deadlines. And if you don't meet them, these are the consequences. But I don't think I have a good answer for that.
Well, along those same lines, one person is asking Lisa what program you use for the application in multi-language.
We use a fairly common program. It's called Neighborly. A lot of organizations are using it. specialized it or customized it for our use. It's not as user-friendly as we would like it to be for our case managers, or honestly for our clients, but we're working on it, trying to get it better. But one of the best features is that click for multiple languages. We have the two languages that are most prominent in our county are Spanish and Korean. I did not know until literally 2 weeks ago that we had a large Korean speaking population in our county. So that's something we need to reach out to that population to expand more. Folks with mental health disabilities or physical disabilities that make it difficult for them to complete applications, we do everything we can to help them to complete those applications. And that's where I think it really helps being a tenant-based program and having so many communications to continuum of care agencies where we can get somebody hooked up with an individual or agency that can help them get through the process, through the applications. But it's neighborly is a short answer.
Okay. Somebody is making the suggestion for the relocation question to look into the HCV emergency housing vouchers through the continuums of care. There are 70,000 new vouchers nationally for that, so that might assist that person who is looking to relocate.
Right. We didn't get any. Anne Arundel County did not get any of those vouchers. We're very disappointed, but some of the other surrounding counties got them.
Okay. And this is generally to all the presenters. Are any of you doing, or are you doing financial coaching or counseling for those applying for rental money?
When we worked with United Way, it was one of the stipulations in that pandemic assistance was that they had to attend 3 rental counseling appointments. And then when we were completed with it, we did encourage everyone we worked with to continue working with our financial capabilities counselor because it's a free service that we offer. And I think pretty much everybody we talk to, we always offer those services as an ongoing, just I guess for reassurance with especially their budgets.
We started out trying to provide counseling and pretty significant financial counseling back in March when our program started, and it has kind of dwindled away as the volume of applications has increased, and we just are focused on getting money out the door. Our case managers do try to provide some financial counseling. We ask for a budget, but it just as a function of the volume, it's gone a little bit by the wayside.
Ditto, Lisa.
Okay, the only other, the last question or comment that I'll put forward is somebody mentioned that in their area, they're seeing actually that they're having trouble getting the tenants to cooperate. The landlords are looking for the money and want to take the money and not have to evict the tenant, but the tenant isn't cooperating with the application process. Are any of you seeing any of that? I mean, other than Jimmy, you mentioned that people aren't completing the application, but just wondering if you're seeing that kind of reversed issue and how you address it.
It's not a high volume, so I don't want to paint that picture, but I have seen a handful of instances where the tenants just kind of know, like, you can't evict me, what are you going to do? And the reality is, it's like, sure, you can evict them eventually and sue them for that back money, but they don't have the money, so like you're never going to see that. I think the only approach I've had is trying to talk to the tenants and explain to them, like, you can't be evicted in this moment, but you will get evicted. And then when you have an eviction on your record, like it's going to be significantly harder to find an apartment in the future. Like you don't want that. And that, I mean, that's again, that's as the pandemic has only heightened existing things, like that's a normal conversation to have with tenants. It's just a volume thing here of like, you don't want an eviction on your record, do whatever you can to stop an eviction from being on your record. And hopefully they hear that.
We have not seen that too often, but sometimes when we're working with landlords, we'll have a whole list of applicants from that landlord's property, and the landlord will go through the list and they'll say, oh, but what about this household and that household that is also really far in arrears? And we ask for phone numbers and we contact them and see if we can't get them. Particularly, we're finding that in the public housing properties because there's often not a really good relationship between the landlord and the tenant. And so when the tenant is contacted by somebody outside of that landlord-tenant relationship, they're more likely to participate.
Well, the communications that I've had have been that the first assistance program was there were so many stipulations on it that people were either unable to get the documentation that they needed, or the way that the stipulations were made it where they didn't qualify, so they don't feel like they want to do it again. So my communication with them has mostly been that, you know, the qualifications are different for this one than they were for the last one, and that you're better off to try it, because if you get to the end of the eviction moratorium and you haven't gotten caught up on your rent, your landlord will be able to evict you. So I think it's just a communication thing. The more you communicate with people, try to make it easier.
Yeah, and somebody else is commenting, and I think this may play a role as well. There are people who are uncomfortable submitting documentation that gives their personally identifiable information away to a government agency. So there's that issue as well, as much as it might help them. I think that this is a clarifying question. Somebody is asking, the checks are written to the tenants to pay the landlords. That's how it's done? No, it's the landlords get paid directly. As you mentioned, Lisa, you prefer to do it that way because you require that the landlord doesn't evict the person for 3 months.
Right. So we can draft in some protections for the tenant that if the tenant were to pay directly, they couldn't require. So we have not had an instance where there was a need to make a payment direct to the tenant. And we find that it helps a lot to get landlord participation when they know that that check is coming straight to them.
Great, well, that is all of our questions. Thank you all again for your participation, and I will turn it back over to Bruce.
Everybody, this was terrific and very valuable. And for those that can't make it, it's being recorded. It'll be up by Monday for sure. You can tell others when they ask. We do get that email all the time. So for us, the next step is really just to talk quickly about NHRC membership, and this is what we do and what you fund when you are a member. We really appreciate that we've had a very good, strong showing this year, even though it's been a strain on many organizations. We appreciate that people stepped up. You can see what we do in the field with plenty of things, not just this topic, but advocacy in Congress. We're going to do a whole thing on disabilities and housing counseling, which I think will be really educational for everybody. We're planning on having NeighborWorks talk about the new funding program that they've got for housing counseling, which will become available. We will have more resources on helping people in forbearance and shifting to home ownership, to shifting to affordable payments. We'll continue our innovations in housing counseling series. We're doing lots of work, and we could use your help, as Elliot said, on prioritizing first-time home buyers in today's real estate market where there's many challenges, and we're trying to figure out how to do that. Don't forget to do the survey that Ellie talked to you about. Definitely don't forget to reach out to your senators, both senators, Democratic and Republican, whatever you've got in your state, about $100 million for housing counseling. As we said in the beginning of the call, there's a Dear Colleague letter that Senator Menendez is circulating. This is really valuable. It's a valuable part of the appropriations process, and having you and your local agencies contacting your senator is really critical right now. So we look out on the listserv for when we have our next session. We don't have one scheduled yet, but it'll be in July. And I think we've got a lot of good things that are in the hopper here. So thanks for all your good work in the field, and we will talk with you soon.